The smell of my life, before, was a mix of stale coffee, pine-scented soap, and the faint, clean aroma of my wife's shampoo on the pillow next to me. I was a creature of the pre-dawn dark, a man who measured his days by the heft of his gear and the quiet hum of the refrigerator before the rest of the house stirred. My world was one of carefully packed bags, worn leather gloves that fit my hands like a second skin, and the silent, solemn nod I'd give my reflection in the hallway mirror before slipping out the door. I was a wildland firefighter, a title that sounds far more heroic than it feels at 4 in the morning when you're checking the tension on a chainsaw chain for the 5th time. The reality of my job was long stretches of disciplined boredom punctuated by moments of pure, adrenaline-fueled terror. It was a life of waiting for the call, a life lived on the precipice of leaving. Sarah, my wife, understood. She had the patience of a saint, managing the home front, the 2 whirlwinds we called our children, Lily and Tom, with a grace I could only admire from a distance. I was the provider, the protector in a grand, abstract sense, fighting fires in forests hundreds of miles away to keep the world safe. But on the ground, in our small suburban house, I was becoming a ghost. I'd see it in the little things. A new drawing taped to the fridge I hadn't seen being made, an inside joke between Sarah and the kids that I didn't understand, the way Tom would hesitate for a fraction of a second before running to me when I came home, as if needing to remember who I was. There was a dull ache in my chest that had become a permanent part of my anatomy, a quiet grief for the life I was missing in order to do the job I loved. I told myself it was a noble sacrifice. I told myself the paychecks and the security were worth the empty seat at the dinner table. I told myself my kids would understand when they were older. I was lying to myself, of course, but the lies were a necessary fuel. The rupture came on a Tuesday. I just finished a grueling 4-day shift on a minor blaze up north and was promised a full week at home. I'd planned it all out. School pickups, a trip to the zoo, finally fixing the loose board on the back deck. I was going to be a father again, a husband again, not just a weary traveler passing through. The call came at dinner. I was halfway through a plate of Sarah's lasagna, Lily chattering about her part as a tree in the school play, when my phone vibrated with a unique, menacing buzz I had programmed for dispatch. It was the summons. Sarah's face fell, the light in her eyes dimming instantly. It wasn't a request. It was a deployment. The chimney. My captain's voice was strained, stripped of its usual bravado. It's a monster, jumping fire breaks like they're garden hoses. We're all being called in. All of us. The chimney. We'd been hearing whispers about it for days. A dry lightning strike in an inaccessible part of the national forest that had been festering, growing, waiting. My week of being a dad vanished in a crackle of static over the phone. I looked at Lily, her face frozen mid-sentence, her smile gone. I saw the familiar resignation in Sarah's eyes, the tightening of her jaw. I stood up from the table, the lasagna turning to ash in my mouth. There was no time for a long goodbye, no time for promises. I just kissed them both, a quick, inadequate gesture, and went to grab my go bag, the one that was always packed, always ready. The normal world was over. My other life had just begun. The next 48 hours were a descent into a special kind of hell, an angry orange world that smelled of scorched earth and vaporized pine. The chimney wasn't a fire. It was a living, breathing entity with a malevolent intelligence. The roar of it was constant, a physical pressure on your eardrums that vibrated through the soles of your boots and into your bones. Heat radiated in waves that were visible, distorting the air, making the landscape shimmer as if in a nightmare. We worked in a state of heightened, exhausted focus, our world shrinking to the few feet of ground in front of us, to the weight of the Pulaski in our hands, to the strained breathing of the person next to us on the line. We cut breaks, dug trenches, and orchestrated backburns in a desperate, brutal dance with the blaze. Sleep came in snatched, 20-minute increments, slumped against a truck tire, your body still vibrating with the phantom roar of the flames. Thirst was a constant companion, a dry, rasping thing in the back of your throat that no amount of water could fully quench. My crew was a good one, seasoned veterans who moved with an economy of motion born from years of experience. We didn't need to talk much. A glance, a hand signal, a shared look of grim determination was enough. But this fire was different. It tested our limits, pushing us past the point of mere physical exhaustion and into a place of deep, spiritual weariness. It felt like we were trying to hold back the ocean with a handful of shovels. The crisis, the moment that truly broke me, came about 36 hours in. We were holding a critical ridge, a last-ditch defensive line protecting a small, unincorporated community of a few dozen homes tucked into the valley below. The wind had shifted, turning on us with a savage fury, and the fire, which had been a moving wall in the distance, became a charging beast. Embers the size of my fist rained down around us, starting spot fires behind our line. The order came over the radio to pull back, to cede the ridge. But we were too slow or the fire was too fast. A section of our line was overwhelmed, and a wall of flame erupted, cutting off 4 of us, including me, from the main retreat path. We were trapped. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my exhaustion. The roar was deafening now, the heat so intense it felt like it was cooking me inside my own gear. Next to me was a rookie, a kid named Miller. He couldn't have been more than 20. Throughout the deployment, he'd been cocky, full of the bravado that young men mistake for strength. Now he was frozen. His eyes were wide behind his goggles, his face pale under a layer of soot. He was staring at the wall of fire before us, his knuckles white on the handle of his shovel. He was going to break. I could see it. In that moment, all the training, all the protocols, they meant nothing. We were just 4 men about to be burned alive. My captain's voice was a frantic squawk in my earpiece, but I couldn't make out the words over the sound of the world ending. And in that inferno, with death a certainty, a strange clarity came over me. I wasn't thinking about tactics. I was thinking about my daughter's school play. I was thinking about how she was going to be a tree, standing still and silent on a stage, and how I wouldn't be there to see it. That thought, so mundane and so painful, sliced through my terror. I looked at Miller, at this terrified boy who was someone's son, and I saw not a rookie firefighter, but a kid who deserved to go home. I moved closer to him, putting my gloved hand on his shoulder. He flinched, his eyes darting towards me, filled with a primal fear I recognized. I pulled down my bandana. "Miller," I shouted to be heard over the roar. "Look at me. What's your mom's name?" He just stared, confused. "What?" he yelled back. "Your mom. What's her name?" "Sharon," he stammered. "Okay, Miller. Sharon," I said, my voice dropping, becoming calmer, more focused. "Sharon doesn't want a hero's medal. She wants her son back. We are not dying on this ridge. You hear me?" I didn't know where the words came from. They weren't from a training manual. They were from that aching place in my own chest, the part of me that was a father. I was talking to him, but I was also talking to myself. "We're going to walk through that gap to the left." I pointed to a slightly less dense patch of fire. "It's going to be hot. It's going to be the scariest 10 seconds of your life. But you are going to think about your mom's face and you are going to keep walking. You do not stop. You understand." Something shifted in his eyes. The raw panic was replaced by a flicker of something else. Trust. He gave me a short, jerky nod. The connection was made. It wasn't an order from a superior. It was a pact between 2 human beings who wanted to live. That moment changed my calculus. My objective was no longer just to survive. It was to get this kid, Miller, home to his mother. My duty was no longer to the forest or the mission, but to the person next to me. Fueled by this sudden, fierce empathy, I wasn't just a firefighter following orders. I was a man with a singular personal purpose. I guided the 4 of us, my voice calm and steady, directing us towards the gap, my focus entirely on keeping them moving, on keeping Miller's eyes locked on the goal. We moved as one, a small, determined unit bound by a promise I had made to a young man I barely knew. The 10 seconds it took to push through that gap in the flames felt like an eternity. The heat was a physical blow, a solid wall that stole the air from my lungs and tried to melt the gear right off my body. I kept my hand on Miller's back, pushing him forward, shouting his mother's name over and over again like a mantra. We stumbled out the other side, gasping, coughing, our skin scorched and our spirits battered, but we were alive. We were through. That small act of human connection, that shared moment of vulnerability on the ridge, became the pivot point for our survival and, eventually, for the fight itself. Rejoining the rest of the crew, there was no time for celebration, only a renewed and desperate effort. But something had changed in me, and it seemed to ripple outwards. I relayed our situation with a new clarity, and my voice, stripped of panic and filled with a grim purpose, seemed to steady the others. We regrouped, and guided by a combination of my captain's strategy and my newfound, intense focus on keeping everyone safe, we managed to establish a new, more defensible line. We didn't beat the fire with brute force. We won by inches, by sheer, stubborn refusal to break, by the collective will of a group of people who had been reminded of what they were fighting for. Not just land, but each other. 12 hours later, the wind finally died down, and a blessed, unforecasted rain began to fall, hissing against the scorched earth. The monster was tamed. The fight was over. The ride home was a silent, surreal journey. The world outside the truck window slowly transitioned from a blackened, skeletal moonscape back to green trees, paved roads, and manicured lawns. Felt like returning from another planet. I was running on empty, every muscle screaming, my body a vessel of pure, bone-deep exhaustion. All I could think about was my own bed, the feeling of Sarah's arm around me, the sound of my children breathing in the rooms next to ours. I walked through my front door looking like a refugee from a war zone. I was covered in a thick layer of soot and grime. My face was gaunt, and I smelled like a campfire that had been put out with ditch water. Sarah rushed to me, her arms wrapping around me, her hug conveying a universe of relief and worry. And then my kids came running out of the living room. Lily, my 7-year-old, stopped dead in her tracks, her nose wrinkled. Tom, who was 5, hid behind his sister. Then Lily looked at me, her expression not one of awe or relief, but of simple, childish disappointment. She held up a colorful piece of paper. "You missed it," she said, her voice flat. "I was the best tree. And you weren't there." Tom peeked out from behind her and added, his little voice a dagger to my already wounded soul, "You always miss everything." It was a gut punch, a physical, sickening blow. I had just spent 48 hours in hell. I had walked through fire. I had faced death and brought a young man back with me. I had saved people's homes. And this was my welcome. A wave of bitter, hot anger washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the roar, about the heat, about the terror. I wanted to show them my burns and make them understand the sacrifice. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to unleash the torrent of righteous indignation boiling inside me. But then, in the space of a single, suspended heartbeat, I saw Miller's face. I saw the pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes on that ridge, the terror of a son who thought he would never see his mother again. And I remembered the promise I had made not just to him but to myself, that the reason we fight is to get home. What was the point of coming home if I was a stranger here? What was the point of saving a community if I lost my own family? The anger evaporated, replaced by a profound, aching sadness, and then a startling moment of clarity. They weren't being cruel. They were being honest. From their perspective, I did always miss everything. Their world wasn't one of fire lines and tactical retreats. It was school plays and bedtime stories and scraped knees. I was a hero in a world they couldn't see, and an absence in the only world that mattered to them. I closed my mouth, took a deep breath that tasted of smoke and regret, and sank to my knees, right there in the entryway, my filthy gear groaning in protest. I looked my daughter in the eye. "Tell me about your play, sweetie," I said, my voice hoarse. "Tell me about being a tree." That night, after a long shower where I watched the black soot of the fire swirl down the drain, I didn't just go to sleep. I sat on the edge of Lily's bed and had her describe every detail of her performance. I looked at the drawing she had made, a lopsided, smiling tree with my whole family standing underneath it. I went into Tom's room and heard all about the goal he had scored in a soccer game I hadn't even known was happening. I listened. I didn't talk about my work. I didn't try to explain. I was just there, present in a way I hadn't been for a very long time. I realized my job wasn't just fighting fires in the forest. It was also about extinguishing the small fires of loneliness and disappointment at home. My great battle wasn't against a 50-foot wall of flame, but against the creeping distance that threatened to turn my own home into a place I just visited. The next morning, I woke up feeling a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes after a deep and necessary emotional catharsis. The house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen and saw Lily's drawing taped to the refrigerator. I stood there for a long time, the smell of coffee brewing, looking at that simple, colorful picture. I had spent my life running toward emergencies, believing that my purpose was found in the heart of the crisis. But I was wrong. My purpose wasn't just in the leaving. It was in the returning, and in the quiet, patient work of rebuilding the connections that the leaving had strained. I had saved a rookie on a fiery ridge by reminding him of home, and in doing so, he had, without ever knowing it, saved me by helping me find my own way back. My life would still be one of goodbyes, but now I understood that the true measure of my strength wasn't in how I faced the fire, but in how I tended to the warmth of the hearth I always came home to.